Well, here we are. We are recording this session of Now and Next on Tuesday morning. It's June the 9th, so some things may have changed by the time you hear this. Dave Trafford with you. Welcome in, along with our comms and strategy team. Lindsay Broadhead is here. Anne-Marie Aikins around the table, and it's rounded out by Bob Reid. It's Tax Freedom Day, by the way. I know that wasn't on our list. Everybody all excited about that, right?
Whoa.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Oh my! There are some things, Lindsay, that I love around sort of the marketing and comms things. Every day is a special day for something, and I heard today it was Front End Loader Day or something like that, international. I mean, who wouldn't want to be celebrating Front End Loader Day, right?
Perfect.
And
I
what
haven't
would
even
you do if you
started my
missed it?
shopping yet. That's the problem.
Yeah. What do you do if you missed it? Okay, lots to get around on and right across the country. But can we start with the all of the hype or lack thereof around the World Cup? Here we are. We're all in Toronto. The World Cup is also going to be hosted in Vancouver for a number of games. If we're lucky, I guess, Bob, we don't have the bill that the Vancouver games have. It seems as though they're paying considerably more in terms of the cost of those games and organizing them than we are here in Toronto. Having said all of that, combined, there's over $1 billion in expenses. And I think right now, a couple of days out from the first game, that's all most Canadians are hearing. I get that, there's certainly a fan base in Toronto that loves this and loves the idea of having it here. But by and large, across the country, there's what we're hearing is, wow, $1 billion. How are we going to get that back?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's trouble with the value proposition, I think, because I'm not feeling it. And I don't know if anybody is. And especially if you don't live in Toronto or Vancouver, it would be frustrating, and I'm sure it is, for people to say, well, this is nice of me to be paying for a big party in those two cities that I have zero benefit coming my way from. And even here in Toronto, I mean, to me, I think it's great that, we're one of the host cities for the biggest sporting event in the world. But personally, I'm just looking at it as, how much disruption is this going to mean for me trying to go about my business while these games are on and happening? And what do we get out of it at the end of it? And that, I think, always remains to be seen. If it goes well, if it runs smoothly, if it's a good time, if there are lots of cool street parties and festive gatherings, then we'll say that was a great thing. It was good that we did that. But we're not there yet. And I think that's the challenge for the organizers and anybody in communications around it is trying to convince us that this is a really good thing before whatever it's going to be actually happens.
Well, Anne-Marie, isn't it a little late to be having this conversation, though? I mean, we're a couple of days out from the first game here in Toronto. If there were a strategy in place, it should have been as soon as the games were granted to say, this is how it's going to play out. These are the benefits. I realize that there were some moving targets in terms of costs, but the idea that there is some level of precedence with the Commonwealth Games. I mean, I realize it's not the World Cup, but for all of the angst around, leading up to the Commonwealth Games in Toronto, it went extraordinarily well. There was not a lot of rearview mirror complaining. In fact, there was very little complaining during the time of the games, with all the worries about, I'm going to get across the city on the Gardiner and so on. The whole athletes' village is still a legacy piece. There's the pool at University of Toronto Scarborough campus. There's the velodrome in Milton. There's lots that you can look at and say there's precedent here for these kinds of big events to really benefit the community. And we haven't really heard that.
Yeah, World Cup events rarely build the legacy and infrastructure that other world-class events do. I was very involved in the Pan Am Games in the planning for it. And I do remember the constant complaining about the cost, because there was a lot of infrastructure that needed to be built, and people would go, I've never even heard of the Pan Am Games. What are we doing? Why are we spending all this money? There was very typical Toronto angst and complaining beforehand. And I do remember working very, very hard to create messaging and the communication strategy that really spoke to the legacy. And, my neighborhood where I live in Corktown is the entire neighborhood is a result of PANAS. But we don't have that for the World Cup. So it's been much more difficult and less tangible for organizers to point to the legacy of it. And you have to point to economic benefits and the future economic benefits, job creation, which I don't think anybody really has spoken to very well, the tourism benefits. And I think Toronto is going to really enjoy it when it's here because the energy level of World Cup games is intense. It's amazing, and it's an opportunity for a city to really shine and really get its act together, clean itself up for all the company they're going to have from around the world. Um, I wish we could do that kind of regularly. Just always plan for company and have our city shine a little bit more, and have our infrastructure and our transportation systems up to date and current and shiny, as if company was about to arrive. But we don't. We don't want to spend that money, and it is a real opportunity for us to really shine. But Toronto is going to complain all the way through it, so you have to expect that. I think the transportation systems and our security systems have been planning for years for this. So I'm fairly confident that we'll make it through. It'll be fun. People will enjoy it, and then we'll begin complaining about the cost.
Well, Lindsay, I think maybe my mom should have run the place, because if it was all about making sure the house was ready for guests at the last minute, Mom would have had the place spick and span. Everything would have been organized in place for its place. It would have been clean. There would have been food set out. The freezer was full. So maybe that's the approach we should be taking. But to Anne Marie's point as well. Are we just kind of chronic complainers in Toronto? Is that just part of the civic culture then?
I love this idea of mobilizing all the grandmothers. Can
Right?
you imagine what would get done? This, everything would be fine. There would be flowers in every corner, forks to the left, knives to the right. We'd be good. Are we chronic complainers? I think we've kind of earned the right to complain about a few things, if truth be told. Yes, we're always the city where fun goes to die is kind of our raison d'etre, but I'm going to park all that. I love Toronto. I know you guys love Toronto. I love sports. I think this is going to be okay, right? I think everything is going to be okay, and it will be fun, and folks who are able to enjoy will enjoy, and it will be good. Bob said right at the beginning, he used the word if a few times. And I think that's actually the most important word in all of this, right? If it goes to plan, if we get any economic upside, if, there's a litany of things we have no idea about. And I'm struck how this game's, we know this, but it's a decentralized game. It's very weird, right? It's not like we're descending upon a city. We're descending upon multiple cities, which changes and flips on its head the World Cup economic model. So Toronto is also very, very good, because it's true, at advocating for, come to our city, come, and there will be an upside to it all, because that's always been true. We don't know what the upside is going to be here, because we don't know who's coming, and what kind of events will actually be showcased, in terms of how folks will engage with it. So there are so many of the if questions on the horizon. I think it's kind of a fool's errand to guess. So I say dive in, have fun, make it good. Stay away if you don't want to do it, and that's fine. My only anecdote is, and again, it was a very centralized model, so it's apples and oranges here, but I was one of the people who went to Vancouver for the Olympics. And I know folks at the time, were very scared, especially if you were a local, about what would happen to communities and stuff like that. It was magic. It showcased Canada in the most magical way, apples to oranges, but I'm hopeful that we'll get a little of that.
Yeah, but that's probably as close as you get, right, Bob, in terms of the Olympics? I heard somebody in Atlanta talking about it. It's one of the host sites as well. It's going to be like hosting the Super Bowl in Atlanta over a whole month, almost every other day. So the exposure is intense, but so is the effort and the energy that goes into it. And all I keep hearing is that from a marketing perspective, and I heard John Tory talking about it, mayor at the time that put his signature on the deal to say we want them, um, that you couldn't ignore the long-term benefit in terms of just being on the world stage. And maybe we just take that for granted, or we're blind to that. But it seems as though that is what all of the host cities are primarily saying. Look at us, and that there's real benefit in that we probably don't see when we're this close to the ground.
Well, it would be a big miss if we weren't in the game. If Toronto wasn't on the list, if Toronto wasn't hosting the games that we are, I think everybody would consider that a loss. So it's good that we're here, but now the challenge is and the proof will be in the pudding. As I said before, if it rolls out well, if the city does get caught up in it, if there is a tangible vibe that everybody can feel and everybody can get excited about, then I think the public verdict will be, this was a good thing. We needed this. It's good that we were involved with it. It's good that we were.
Yeah,
It's interesting, though, just to bounce back to what Anne-Marie, I think, was getting at, too, is where we've missed the boat, and I'm kind of head scratchy about this, is it hasn't been very clear that all of this effort is going to lead to specific stuff, right? Like, where is the velodrome upside? Is the swimming pool upside that you mentioned? And I also, to Anne-Marie's point, I appreciate the model is different for World Cup, but what are the specific outputs? Because I think collectively, all of the boards of trades, the destination groups, the business community, et cetera, would rally behind specifics. So that's been a big comms miss in all of this, is what are the things that, aside from the amorphous upside of being on the world stage, which matters, I think we know it matters, but what are we get A, B, C, and D out of this? Is it potholes being filled? Is that really what we're pointing to? If so, that's a learning, and that will be a learning for the future. I hope it's much more than that.
Well, again, I go back to it, Anne-Marie. I tend to think this group is kind of paying attention collectively, the four of us. So if that were being said out loud, we would have noticed. And what is it exactly that Toronto, Vancouver, Canada writ large is going to get in terms of the benefit? I've heard people talk about how it's going to contribute to the GDP. Yeah, maybe a little bit in Toronto and locally in Vancouver, but it just seems to be a hard thing to sort of nail down. The only thing I will tell you is, and I think you're probably right, the transit services and the transportation services have been thinking about this for a long time. I think it's going to be the easiest month to get around in downtown Toronto in history.
That's what happened during Pan Am.
Exactly.
And
Two things
Vancouver.
happened. We all worked together. Every transportation agency said, this is down. Can you go up? This is down. Can you go up? Are you going to have to do this? Are you going to have to do that? That kind of thing. They worked in the same room, making sure there was redundancy built right throughout it. And that's what they're doing this time. And after Pan Am, that stayed with us. They decided this model this makes sense. Let's continue. But during COVID, that model shut down again. They stopped working in the same room because we couldn't work in the same room. And it didn't kickstart again until the World Cup. And I really hope that's a legacy, that stays with us, that intercoordination between transportation agencies stays. So, but I think people are talking about legacies, but tourism is talking about their benefits. Nobody's talking out of one voice to say, these are all the benefits.
Yeah. Yeah. And the only thing I will complain about anecdotally is that we play once a week out at the Galway Arms and at Islington and Queensway. and it's pretty much FIFA Central for the next month. So they've decided that they don't need us playing music on soccer nights.
Shame.
I'm
Gee.
just saying. I'm just saying. We can't. We can't compete. But no. And you know what? Knowing that bar and that there's all kinds of them around the city, I think to your point, Bob, that's where we're really going to see the energy take off. Where there's community there beyond waving the flag for whatever team you're cheering for. So, but and we make the mistake of thinking that the economic benefit is going to result in money for the city. It's not. Let's just be clear about that. It's going to be for the pubs and the bars and the hotels and the transportation services and the cabs and all those sorts of things. That's where the economic impact is going to be felt, and it may take months, if not years, to really figure out the long-term benefit of that.
If there will be a long-term benefit,
sure. Yeah,
I think it'll probably be a short-term benefit. The only other thing we've been hearing about are these soccer pitches that are supposed to get built, and that's been screwed up somehow. So, yeah, it's a tall order. I mean, even the changes to BMO Field are temporary. That's all coming out after this thing's over. So,
yeah, exactly, and that was required by FIFA, and MLSE wasn't interested in doing it. So, yes, you're right. There's a
metaphor there, I think.
Exactly. The numbers are out last week. The phrase thrown around, Lindsay, we're in a technical recession. And boy, a lot of people's hair caught fire there on both sides of the political aisle. There were people saying, see, I told you, it's a year of Carney, and look where we are. We're the worst off, and the G7, et cetera. And I think this is a very nuanced conversation to have, because the line is you can put all the economists together head to head and you never reach a conclusion. So it's never really sure of what a technical recession is. But I would have thought that the guy who sat in the banker's chair in Canada and the UK for a considerable period of time would have stick-handled that a little bit better in terms of reassuring Canadians that we're okay, rather than just saying effectively saying we're in the state of recalibrating our economy. Trust me.
Well, your question's a bit loaded, so I'll take it to
Really?
critique Carney first. Let's critique Carney first. It wasn't the guy who was in the UK or the head of the bank who should have answered the question, because I think that's actually who did answer the question. He was wearing that hat, and he got really pointy-headed and technical. What we needed was probably a politician to answer that question and understand that he's talking to, the proverbial people, rather than to be right on what the definition is, because that it's not that it's moot, it matters, but it wasn't actually what was at stake or at issue. So, and this is something I'll let the other guys chime in on it. And a lot has been said about it, right? Is that this was a moment to sympathize, recognize, and speak to wallet issues. So go a little lower than high economic issues. On the positive side, though, not taking your bait. You also know about economics that there are runs that lead up to whatever happens in a particular quarter. So this isn't Carney's doing, right? Anything he does or doesn't do while he was leading office, we won't see the impact of that. It's a trailing indicator, right? So it's certainly an indicator for previous Liberal governments, and I think that's what Poilievre was getting at, but that has other political implications if he wants to be bringing up Trudeau still at this stage and whether that's a benefit. But as it relates to blaming this government and Carney, that is a disingenuous accusation.
Yeah, let's face it. This is such a nuanced conversation that happens over most people's heads, Anne Marie. The idea that, you can't just blame Trump. Yeah, you can. I mean, when you consider that we are the largest trading partner with the United States and we're having a trade war with them, guess what? We're the only G7 country that's really feeling the effects to the extent that we are. Okay, I get that. Nobody wants to hear that argument politically, but on the other hand, the announcement from StatsCan came out, was it a Thursday or 2 Thursdays ago? And it wasn't until the Monday that we heard from the Prime Minister. You know, again, I would advise anybody in a comms team to be listening to this group, because Lindsay's advice probably would have been okay on Friday. This is what you should say on Monday. And it can't be the pointy-headed banker comments. So there was a failure there again, and that seems to be fairly consistent in the Prime Minister's office.
Well, it was a bit slow. Lindsay's correct. He came off as a calm technocrat and to explain it, and he was trying to, I think, be soothing, but and explain it. But as you said, Dave, it was really too late, because that story had been written all throughout the weekend. So I think he was really trying to say, don't panic, could be worse, which is true. But what he needed to do, I think, is really speak quickly, immediately following the release of this technical recession stuff. Immediately speak directly to people that have lost their jobs because of tariffs. Could speak to them. The people struggling to put groceries on the table. Those people really don't care about the technicalities of, is it or is it not a recession? Is it a technical? They don't care about that. They just care about the reality that they're living through. And I think he really needed to speak personally to them.
Yeah, Bob, I mean, I was on the radio with Jean Belitis last week, and I said, okay, yeah, maybe it's a label, but how has my life changed remarkably since this announcement? And to Emery's point, it hasn't changed remarkably, but there are certain things that I'm more concerned with as whether or not we're in a technical recession.
Yeah, I think Emery's bang on that there needed to be that empathy, that understanding of the tough spots that a lot of people are in, and that at the end of the day, that's what really matters, not what a consensus or dueling economists have to say about it. I like Lindsay's point too, that he needed to be more of a politician. Because I could imagine if it was Doug Ford responding to it, he just would have called BS on it. Said, I don't buy it. I don't believe it. I'm out there. I see the positive things that are happening in the economy, and we're moving forward. Are there some bumps in the road? Sure, but this isn't anything worth worrying about. Like, it needed to be more commanding that way than, as has been said, pointy-headed.
Yeah, and I think we're all just generally triggered by the phrase recession, because it takes us right back to 08, 09. That's not even close to where we are, Lindsay. So, there is that. I know you don't want to necessarily make generational comparisons when it comes to stuff like that. But, even if you were doing that, you could have said, and Canada got through it because we had the strongest banking system. We had the strong economy. We have a history of being able to deal with these. I didn't hear that from them.
Well, and you're writing the speech, right? Like it's quite shocking. Again, like going to the positive side of the Carney ledger, it's quite shocking. We're not in way worse shape, right? Like we're being attacked at every angle. We are being either forced to, or, we need to too late spend a bunch of money right now that either should have been spent before, or we're catching up with defense and infrastructure builds and all of these things. It's quite shocking we're not in worse shape, right? So it's not that there isn't a, I think we all would, I imagine, encourage him not to belittle or fail to acknowledge the economic reality we are. It's dire for many. But what you're talking about is a similar message that I haven't heard much about, which is it's being stewarded, it's being captained, it's being led by someone who can see far beyond what we can see over the horizon. And it's going to be okay. I'm going to take us there. There's going to be bumps. We're going to navigate through. He's used big, lofty academic language often. That's resonated, but he hasn't brought it down or tallied it to the ground in a way where we felt, okay, I'm on the boat, I'm paddling with them, and I know that the captain knows where we're going. I want a bit more of that, and his numbers we've seen have started to trickle down. in not notably, but over the last couple of days. And I wonder if that's a bit of this.
Yeah, it might be, Bob, but, it's also it was a liaison poll that had the NDP at 15%, and the gap that, the Liberals lost was sort of relative to the gains that the NDP had made. I find it a little hard to believe that the NDP has doubled their popular support in the last 3 months, but, to Lindsay's point, there's a lot going on there, and a lot of this is driven by emotion.
Yep. And, it's such a cliche, but time will tell, Dave.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm with you. I don't think the NDP is suddenly rocketing back up the charts, but we'll we'll see how things go. He's a year plus into the role now. He's collecting some baggage as any leader of any government does, and people who are not so sure about him or maybe a little less sure about
Mm. Or we're getting to know him better. It
him. Yeah, right.
kinda
That's the
cuts
flip
both
side of
ways,
that.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Equally, Anne-Marie, we're getting a different glimpse, and we have since the leadership review for Pierre Poilievre, as the leader of the opposition. And, we talked at length about his speech at that gathering in terms of, how he was gonna kinda turn a page and, um, talk less about Canada being broken. The separatist movement in Alberta, I think, has given him an opportunity to distinguish himself as a federalist. So we heard him this week at a speech, an event in Calgary, and was pretty well. He was the first federal leader out of the bloc to really kind of plant the flag and say, what he had to say about the separatist movement in Alberta. Generally, I thought it was a good move to be that forceful and that obvious. I'm a federalist and I believe in Canada. But what I thought it was interesting was the subtext, and he's really talking about not Alberta leaving Canada, but taking this opportunity to recalibrate and reinvent federalism in Canada. And I suspect that there is an appetite and an opportunity there in terms of the conversation. And what was most remarkable is we've talked a lot about his stance in suggesting you need me as prime minister because Canada is broken. And he's abandoned that entirely. And the speech, again, a little rough around the edges in some cases, but I thought, wow, this is really a new direction. And we talked a lot about whether or not he can change stripes. I think we're getting evidence that perhaps he is.
Yeah, a little bit. I think he wasn't really calming the fire that's happening out in Alberta, but he's making sure it burns in the right direction and that he positions himself as kind of a solution, as an alternative to separating. And I think that's what he's trying to do. And he did that in a very strategic way. His speech got emotional at times about Alberta and his love for it. I think he's, tapped into some emotional energy that's happening in the frustration but redirecting it towards the government as opposed to Canada in general. So he was very, very strategic. He also wasn't alienating uh, uh, to any specific leader or other than Carney, of course. But I mean that is talking separatists, because there's a lot of conservatives coming out saying they agree with separating. So there's lots of conservatives that he could be likened with, and he's trying to separate himself from that. He's positioned himself as the adult in the room. So it is a very different Poilievre, but underneath there, I still hear him. I just still hear him, but that could be just me. But I do appreciate that he's trying to be position himself strategically as a contrast to what's happening in Alberta.
Yeah, and I think it goes broader than just what's going on in Alberta, though. If you consider, Lindsay, his comments around, the federal government's engagement and involvement in, and he starts to list the areas of jurisdiction that the provinces should have, whether it's immigration or healthcare or whatever it might be. That's at the heart of a lot of Alberta's complaint. But you know what? You could say the same thing here in Ontario, right? I mean, we're feeling the effects of the immigration debacle as well. So his idea that the premier should all lock arms and, kumbaya and sing it about a new level of federalism, I think is an interesting tack.
Oh, okay. What I like, what I liked about his remarks was there was a sobriety that he offered in terms of listening to the opposition and listening to the pro-separatists, um, eh, in terms of let's listen to what is valid within their comments and not dismiss them outright, like a campaign, like black and white, like the convoy activity that happened, right? I think when the convoy happened, it became a polarized discussion, right? And there wasn't much credence given to unpacking what was the essence of the complaints. And I think it was very hard to discover the complaints, but also we didn't really listen well as a collective. So I think what he did well was say, let's listen, which is always good as a country. What I utterly hate, and I use that word accurately, is that the voices of the few that are who are Canadian in some cases, but are also being amplified immensely by non-Canadian powers, are being given so much power, and being elevated as a tool for having the conversations that you're talking about. If Ottawa is and our country's path needs to be recoordinated, if Ottawa is overextended its jurisdiction, that's an interesting conversation because provincial powers are also strained right now. Municipal powers are also strained right now, right? So it needs a comprehensive discussion. Do not use the voices of a few who want to separate our country as the elevated entity that we should rely on or treat as gold to have these important conversations. And what's happening by elevating those few loud voices is we're making them true, right? I'm happy to listen to what's behind them. I am not going to, in my mind, it to be okay to have a conversation about separating our country up in pieces. That to me is a failed conversation. Nor am I amazed by, a federal opposition leader who says that he's a federalist. I bloody well hope so, right? Like that, yay. That's not something I'm going to celebrate either. That should be a de facto truth. So yeah, it's just this argument, it should never gotten to this point. And we got to this point. So now let's not use it as a tool for having other conversations. Let's have those other conversations irrespective of separatists.
So is it too late for that though, Bob? I mean, that's what happened in Quebec. We had the groundswell of a minority stand up on their hind legs and do pretty much the same thing historically, and then all of a sudden, Ottawa catches wind of it, and it's being accused of giving into Quebec concerns just writ large.
Mm-hmm. I don't think it's too late. I think this is the time to be raising these viewpoints, and I did think Poilievre was very effective in saying, let's not dismiss these concerns. Let's not, out of hand, pay no heed to the legit concerns that are being raised. Let's take them seriously. Let's have that discussion. And let's try and find a third way forward so that it's not about separatism or non-separatism. It's about how do we make this thing work better? There's an opportunity here to address a lot of concerns. And I thought it was very smart where he talked about, linking arms with Quebec, with Newfoundland and Labrador, that that there are concerns elsewhere in other parts of the country about how things aren't working as well as they could. So I thought it was a very effective way for him to sort of square that circle of acknowledging the separatist viewpoint, but also recalibrating it at the same time.
Yeah, the other thing that drove me a little bit crazy about it, Lindsay, was the idea that I don't know the solutions are simple, so we should be able to get them accomplished. Well, if that were true, then we wouldn't even be having this conversation. And keeping in mind that before the 10 years of Liberals, we had 10 years of Conservative government that was based, their core in Alberta that could be accused of, ignoring all of the grassroots complaints that we're hearing out of Alberta. So it's not an easy solution. I'm going to be interested to hear what Stephen Harper has to say, because apparently he is scheduled to make a major speech on the situation. And I'd be curious to see how much overlap there is between what Harper has to say about federalism and what Poilievre has put on the table.
Sure. I don't, it'll be a fascinating speech, for sure. And I think you're asking the right question. Poilievre has, a different line to manage, right? The diversity of his supporters, he needs to take into account. So it's a different point of view, and Harper will have, more flexibility, obviously, to comment.
Yeah, and again, I go back to the last Quebec vote, Anne Marie, and you will wonder. You recall the premiers all kind of coming out, and at the time, former prime ministers. It'll be interesting to see who kind of joins the chorus, and I can't imagine that Jean Chrétien won't.
No, that's true. That I'm sure there'll be. There's lots of voices, I think, that are readying their positions to come out. But I think, just to finalize it, I think the thing that bothered me about Poilievre and this whole framing, and that reminds me of who he is that his answer, the solution to this, was not, let's go through each of your grievances and work out a solution for each of those grievances. He just poses himself as, I'm the solution to your grievances. So that's, I think, what just reminds me, this is just Poilievre. Just, he's capitalizing on this awful opportunity.
Yeah, as wonkish as it might be, Bob, they still have to deal with first impressions, and Poilievre still has to get over those.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know if this is the campaign for him to do that or not, but yeah, as you say, time will tell. Walk for Israel this past weekend here in Toronto.
Dave, you're going from light subject to light subject.
I know. I'm just
want to get more serious,
We let the fun shine here. So, and I will suggest that there was a positive to this. And I thought, wow, 60,000 people showed up, Lindsay, for this walk. And clearly it was more than just, and I say this with all due respect, just the Jewish community in Toronto. It was the Toronto community that came out in support of the Jewish community and Israel. And I thought, well done. That was great. And yes, we pointed to half a dozen arrests. And if you looked at them, some of them were because a guy was flying a drone around, and, it didn't seem to be any kind of obvious anti-Semitism or racism. Now, I didn't see all the details around that, but that did seem to be at the heart of the reporting on the arrests that were made. So can we just take that as a positive, just the way that whole thing unfolded on the weekend?
I think it's amazing that we have to have this conversation. I mean,
Agreed.
it's hard for me to frame this as a positive. Is it a good sign that things are maybe shifting to a more balanced direction? Maybe. I hope so.
Yeah. Well, the part of
Dave, at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, if your kid's school was being shot at, what would you do? Right? if you couldn't wear, I don't know if you're religious at all, but if you couldn't wear the equivalent of your religion Star of David on your neck because you would be yelled at going down the street, what would you do? Right? So it's like, I find this subject just so mind blowing. These are Torontonians, these are Canadians. We're not talking about what's happening, in this isn't about what's happening in other countries, alone, right? That all matters. But our inability to disconnect, the issues only for this one group, right? We're very able. We're the most diverse city in the world. We're very able to disassociate what other countries are doing, from the people who live here. Very able. So I guess I'm not willing to celebrate yet. I'm happy the walk happened. I'm happy there were no injuries or whatever one should celebrate, I guess. But no, I find it actually all very appalling and embarrassing.
Anne Marie, the interesting part of the reporting for me was, and I realize how and why this happens because they're looking for something that just goes beyond what is expected. But they talked to a lot of folks who live in the Middle East, from Iran, et cetera, who are out there waving their own country's flags and saying we need to support the Jewish community here in Toronto. So I'll take the win at that because I could have seen this blowing up given the environment that we're in, as Lindsay rightly describes. I'm just shocked that it wasn't more of a tinderbox.
Yeah, and I think the reason it wasn't was a result of a very strategic planning by police and our surrounding police agencies. They coordinated an approach, but it was kind of like finally you've coordinated an approach that should have been happening before now. Police have often we don't want to get involved in deciding who's right and who's wrong, as if there was somebody, if you're walking because you're a Jew, that was somehow they had to take a position on that was highly inappropriate. As they took such a strategic plan and were coordinated in their approach, they made arrests when appropriate. It was a much more safe. They could walk as Jews safely, and that's what they deserve at the very, very least, to be able to do. So that is a good thing, but why did it take so much violence before they finally did react this way? So we did mention, I know there was some talk about Olivia Chow wasn't there, and that was disappointing. The organizers had expressed they would have liked to see her take some leadership and be there, but that's a whole nother approach of using silence as a strategy. But it's remarkable that the Olivia Chow, when she was an MP and a mayoral candidate, and even as a councillor, she was very outspoken on a lot of issues: police accountability, carding, the need for stronger oversight for police. That's just one. And now we know she's increasing budgets. She's very silent about her. She doesn't say the things she used to say about police. And I think it's the same way. She was very outspoken. We saw at the very beginning of the war. She was very outspoken in her support for Palestine, and she got backlash for it. And ever since, she's been pretty silent about it. And that again is some silence can be smart sometimes, but if it's used too often, it's then becomes predictable and cautious, and like you're hiding, and other people follow, suit. But it would have been nice for her to have shown some leadership.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to the Olivia Chow thing, Bob, but to the point around policing, yes to Anne Marie, and I guess Lindsay's made this point where this is where we are because we've seen so much in the recent past that has been unacceptable, inappropriate, and I begin to wonder whether or not all of a sudden we've got police presence to that extent and safety in a safe place for the Walk for Israel because Hank Azinga has published his book about anti-Semitism in Toronto Police Service. So the chief seems to have been pushed to that corner. I will not criticize him for doing the right thing and a good job, but boy, if that's what it took to get him to do it, really?
Yeah, I don't know how much of it you could fairly point to on the book front, but it was very well executed, and the police do deserve credit for being on top of this all the way around and ensuring that it went smoothly. To come back to the mayor's absence and as Anne Marie says, silence, I think that's a problem. If she was not going to go, or clearly she wasn't, should have said why. Should have, I'm not going to be there, but here's why. This is a very polarizing, divisive issue. I don't want any perception that I'm taking a side one way or the other on this, so I will not be attending, and I hope the event goes smoothly. And like all Torontonians, I hope that eventually peace can return to Israel and that part of the world. Like, make a statement clear. I'm not going, and here's why, rather than just not showing up, because that leaves it way too open to interpretation.
Yeah, I would think that we expect our leaders to do hard things, though, Lindsay. And it is an uncomfortable place to be. Boy, if they're not going to do it, who is going to do it? Just as a plug, I'm working on a new podcast series about this very thing, and the show is called "This Will Make You Uncomfortable." That is the underlying tone of all of this. I appreciate what Bob's saying, but I would expect, the mayor, the premier, prime minister to step up, and we can get into what Carney had to say if you want. But I think being quiet is not an option here.
I think it's probably evident that I agree. Leaders lead by action. And again, like in my previous rant, I think I offered the mayor or any others an off-ramp of why you do show. And that's because it's about Torontonians and Canadians, right? It doesn't have to be, I don't know her. Well, I think we do. It doesn't have to be about any politician's particular geopolitical or international stand on issues. It's quite simple, right? Your citizens there's a group who are at risk. That sounds like something to stand up for.
The interesting part of all this, Bob, was a piece from the editorial board in the Globe and Mail, and they were talking about Mark Carney's comments when he was in Toronto, and he was at a local synagogue making comments around anti-Semitism. And the editorial board at the Globe said, yes, it's anti-Semitism, but what we're really talking about here at the root of the problem is anti-Zionism. And that is to say that we have just kind of normalized this idea that it's okay to suggest that Israel does not have a right to exist. And that is really at the heart and the root of much of the violence and the repercussion against the Jewish community that we're seeing. And I thought, you know what? That probably is closer than saying it's anti-Semitism.
I think all of that just encapsulates how complex and how divisive all of these factors are. Everything that's at play right now, and how challenging and problematic it is to stick a toe in the water on any side of any line around this. It's you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, it seems.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if nothing else, Anne-Marie, I think to Lindsay's point, it's not just you're damned, we're damned if we do, or we're damned if we don't. So I think as long as we take that approach to it, there needs to be some level of community, and whether that's from our leaders or from just the local neighbors. Again, I go back to my optimism on this is that there were 60,000 people who came out and stood up for the Torontonians who are of Jewish faith and Israelis.
Yes. Yeah. And that is something to celebrate, that they were able to peacefully march, and that so many people joined them in support of that. It was wonderful. And I was really happy to see it go off so smoothly. I haven't heard lots of. I'm sure people still experienced very difficult situations. I heard of a situation, and the person was arrested for assault, spitting at participants in the march, spitting at police. Spitting is considered an assault, so that was. I'm sure there were lots of examples of that, but overall they did march peacefully. And I think we sometimes overcomplicate it by, the statement would be, I'm marching in support of our Jewish neighbors, and I'm here to support them. That's it. I'm not here to make any other political statement. I'm here to support them. And as Bob said, if you can't go, or you're not going to be there, and right now we're in an election year. So it's, everybody is going to everything, opening of every envelope, especially Olivia. So she'd have to have a solid reason why she wasn't going. Is it about security? Is it about whatever it's about? But I don't think there was a solid reason not to go, because I don't think you could explain that. So that's disappointing, but it is a strategy often of Chow, of issues that she was once very open and political about. She now is taking a much more risk averse stance, and that can be very polarizing for many of the people that supported you, and they elect you to do the things you said you were going to do before you were mayor.
So let's leave that there. And when we meet next, I'm going to give you homework. I'm really enjoying the Toronto Star's piece, what I would do if I were mayor, and how people are coming up with some really cool ideas of things that they would want to see. And it gets back, let's put, let the fun shine here. Lindsay will actually talk about stuff that, where the community and the city can thrive, and look at some of the strengths. So you're on notice. I want to ask you to bring at least 2 things next time we talk about what you would do if you were in the mayor's chair at City Hall, and we can have some fun with that. So let's leave it there. This is Now and Next, and it is the Comms and Strategy team: Lindsay Broadhead, Anne-Marie Aikins, Bob Reid. Thanks for being here, and thanks to you for listening and watching. It's Now and Next. I'm Dave Trafford.